Behold the hidden art of horror game atmospheres. I've been binging survival horror games this year and immersing myself using Franz Boma's camera tools. As such, I have spent a lot of time in these spaces flying the camera around looking for the best shots, which has made me realize how much care developers pour into creating an atmosphere. Much of it goes unnoticed consciously, but all the details layer together to create the atmospheres we've grown to love. So in this video, I'm breaking down what makes these environments work. I'll be looking at a handful of games, not because they're the only ones worth studying, but because they're the ones I had camera tools for. The goal here isn't to critique, it's to celebrate the art of creating an effective atmosphere. So with that said, let's dive into our first section, the art of the hallway. Hallways are one of the most overlooked yet essential elements of survival horror. They are the arteries that connect you from one set piece or story beat to the next. And since a huge chunk of your time is going to be spent walking through hallways, the question becomes, how do developers make these hallways interesting? Well, the short answer is they use all of the techniques we will be covering, making them an ideal candidate to cover each category. So let's start with highlighting my favorite hallways from each game and break down the techniques that make them work. The first example is highlighted in this hallway from Alan Wake 2's DLC. This is a great example of using art direction to create a unique, memorable set piece. Despite its simple geometry, this one is striking thanks to the brightly colored paint and intense center lighting, creating a look rarely seen in the genre and making it a hallway that's hard to forget. Next, this area in Silent Hill 2 is a great example of how varied, high-quality textures can make a simple space feel visceral. The peeling walls look so convincing you must want to reach out and just rip them off. But probably the most impactful technique in the genre is lighting. Survival horror games are dark by nature, and lighting is used to create visual balance, add variety with maybe flickering or moving sources, or even convey gameplay scenarios. This hallway from Dead Space is by far my favorite example of lighting as pure visual candy. I mean, I'm sure there's some in-game lore engineering reason for what this room is and why the light moves the way it does, but I didn't care. I still spent a half an hour in this room using slow motion and just marveling at how incredible the lighting looked. This is not just one of the most memorable hallways because of lighting, it's one of the most memorable set pieces from all the games featured. Now, there's another thing I geek out about, which is environmental density, which I define as how much, quote, stuff is packed into the environment. Does it make it feel real, lived in, and used? Does it feel natural in its placement? Does the stuff feel varied, or does it obviously repeat? Does it add context to the lore beyond the usual notes and audio logs? Does it reflect changes in the narrative or world? This street here from Silent Hill F nails that density. The plants, the uneven road, the worn asphalt from tire tracks, even the aging crooked power lines all signal to the player you are in a real town with real history. As the story progresses, the same area slowly becomes overrun with the game's signature red fungal and floral overgrowth, tying directly into the lore both literally and symbolically. Lastly, there's the audio. This year, I tried something different. I turned all the music off and focused only on the ambience and sound design. Take a look, or should I say take a listen, to Cronos: A New Dawn. As the traveler walks, you'll notice subtle ambient noise, the way footsteps change naturally across the floor materials, rock, metal, and then wood. And then after that, there's the spring of this metal device opening up, and it has such a natural, realistic reverb. It all feels authentic. Just listen to this. I recommend playing at least one game without the music for the experience. The next two sections are going to cover the broadest category when it comes to crafting an effective survival horror atmosphere, and that is the game's art direction. Art direction is pretty broad, so let's condense it into two parts: common and unique. By common, I mean the reoccurring themes and settings we see across the genre. Then we'll move into what each game does that's unique. Let's start with the common ground, beginning with hospitals. We have the Wellness Center in Alan Wake 2, the Unity Hospital in Cronos: A New Dawn, the Medical Tech in Dead Space Remake, Raccoon General Hospital in Resident Evil 3 Remake, Brookhaven Hospital in Silent Hill 2 Remake, the medical facility in the Callisto Protocol, and finally, Beacon Mental Hospital in The Evil Within 2. There's a lot of hospitals. Let's go down the list, starting with the Wellness Center in Alan Wake 2. This particular hallway, we see the moonlight cutting through the right windows, throwing heavy shadows to the left, which is an interesting setup, and you will see it echoed in other games, but here it's elevated by one subtle detail. The rain outside flickers across the shadows, adding just enough movement to break the stillness. Next, in Cronos: A New Dawn, the Unity Hospital's worship room contrasts cool blue moonlight from the left windows with warm orange candlelight in the center. Next, in Dead Space and the Callisto Protocol, the sci-fi setting naturally makes their hospital art directions stand out. The contrast of high-tech machinery, wires, screens, and deceased bodies reminds us that no matter the technology, we all bleed the same. But my favorite example is actually just this small corner in Dead Space, where a blood-smeared hole in the wall and flying sparks that cast light across the metal floor create an ominous and memorable scene for me. Next, in the Resident Evil 3 Remake Hospital, what really makes it stand out to me is the sheer brutality of the carnage here. Even after becoming completely desensitized to gore from playing so many survival horror games back to back, this area still made me stop in my tracks out of fear. The blood is splattered everywhere, including the ceiling. There's bodies piled among all this disheveled clutter. It all comes together, conveying that something truly horrific happened before you arrived. Next, Brookhaven Hospital in the Silent Hill 2 Remake. What really stood out to me was the enemy nurse design. Their twitchy movements, bubble heads, obstructed mouths, and unsettlingly sensual clothing, particularly when placed in dynamic lighting, made Brookhaven one of the most effective atmospheres I've experienced. And last but not least, Beacon Mental Hospital in The Evil Within 2 stood out to me for one reason. There is bathroom tile everywhere. It creates an unsettling atmosphere similar to the eerie effect of pool rooms or back rooms. Now, there is another common element across all of these games, and that is some type of nefarious or biological overgrowth that overtakes the environments. In Resident Evil 2 and 3, they feature multiple forms of this tied to Umbrella's viruses. Resident Evil 4 has the parasitic Las Plagas. In Dead Space, it's the necromorph version, while in the Callisto Protocol, it's the biophage version. Cronos: A New Dawn has the same thing, they call it the Change. And Silent Hill F, it comes in the form of a red fungal and floral overgrowth. In Silent Hill 2 Remake, it's a bit more distinct. You have the iconic fog, but when you go to the other world, it shifts to rust, decay, and flesh. Alan Wake 2 takes a more surreal approach with the Dark Presence, a disembodied entity that corrupts the environment, but it's used much more sparingly. I personally think the most unique execution of this idea is from The Evil Within 2. Instead of blood, flesh, or gore, the overgrowth manifests as a pure white slime. It's both grotesque and strangely elegant. Now, there's obviously many more themes that are common amongst all of these games, such as various types of failed and abandoned labs or factories, usually experimenting on some type of alien, biological, or supernatural beings. My favorite example being Patient Zero, tied up and flayed from the Callisto Protocol. Or it could be end or late bosses, usually being comprised of some type of giant conglomerate, grotesque, mutated biomatter. My favorite example here is easily Mother Eliza from Cronos: A New Dawn. Or the fact that the majority of these games take place in some type of rundown, decayed environments, but inevitably you end up somewhere pristine and beautiful for contrast. My favorite being the commonality secret society environments, also in the Callisto Protocol. But we need to move on to what these games do uniquely to themselves in regard to their art direction. So let's get to it. For this section, I'm focusing on two themes: unique set pieces and the ratio in which they appear. First, Alan Wake 2. It's built on the Northlight engine and carries Remedy's distinct style, which I'd call detailed minimalism. The game is highly detailed yet composed, often like minimalist photography. It also has one of the highest ratios of unique set pieces to filler areas. The game rarely repeats and constantly delivers fresh, striking atmospheres. It opens with a dark, brooding rendition of the Pacific Northwest forests. It then shifts to sleepy lake town vibes and includes one of the most authentic cafe depictions I've ever seen. You return to the same forest, but this time during a breathtaking sunset, which is pretty rare for the genre. After you get transported to a surreal nighttime rendition of New York, complete with cluttered streets, sketchy alleyways, and some of the most rain-soaked, moody lighting I've ever seen. It also utilizes an underserved setting, in my opinion, which is an abandoned theme park. It's such a great setting. It's the base of the fantastic indie hit Crow Country, and one of my favorite parts of Detroit Become Human. It leans into another underused but haunting concept of flooded spaces. There is something dreamlike about flooded environments. But most people would argue that the game's art direction peaks with the iconic We Sing musical sequence. In my opinion, this is destined to be remembered as one of gaming's greatest sequences of all time. Next up is Cronos: A New Dawn. Admittedly, its ratio of memorable set pieces to filler is on the lower end. Much of the game takes place in rundown apartment buildings. These environments are dense and very well crafted, but by the end they start to blur together. Still, the game delivers standout moments and establishes a unique visual identity using Unreal Engine 5, particularly in this depiction of an alternate reality Soviet Union on the brink of collapse. Early on, this striking set piece establishes the post-apocalyptic time-warping narrative with this distant tower surrounded by floating debris that defy physics. Later, you time travel back to winter in a Soviet housing compound where the snow and lighting break up the monotony of earlier sections. Another highlight for me was this nuclear holocaust induced sunset, brutal yet visually dynamic, and later allows for some really dramatic lighting in the following factory area. Next, the terminal. This is a key narrative location designed to stand out, and they did a fantastic job on this. And second, my absolute favorite portion of the game is the church, graveyard, and crypt. You explore these ruins long after humanity has gone extinct. Something about wandering burial grounds and abandoned places of worship, knowing everyone is dead, delivers peak survival horror atmosphere for me. Alright, next up is the Dead Space remake. Its art direction draws heavily from Alien and Event Horizon, but I think it set the standard for the style of modern sci-fi survival horror. It also excels at memorable set pieces. The entire Ishimura is designed so that every hallway and section feels unique. Through lighting, layouts, and effects, nearly every area has at least some type of distinct visual identity. As such, there's too many atmospheres to cover in full, but here are some of the standouts to me. The first zero-G sequence. When you enter this room, it's still as breathtaking as it was in 2008 with the original. The reactor room. This room is dense with details, bodies and debris floating in zero-G, the massive reactor oscillating around while sparks and electricity fleeing all over the space. There's also the launch tubes activation set piece, where you have these alternating firing tubes light up the room as vents open and close, creating this dynamic, unforgettable lighting. I thought this yellow-lit hallway was a strikingly moody transition piece. The gravity tether room is just chaotic and overwhelming in scale. This engine-like hallway, you have the fire burning down the middle while you have these oscillating cylinders flanking you on both sides. But my favorite might be the aftermath of Zack's sacrifice, when he blows himself and the undying necromorph up. These deaths leave the room drenched in blood, which is just a brutally metal image. Next, I'm grouping Resident Evil 2 and 3 together, since they share many of the same settings. What stands out to me is their modern American urban environment. When the originals released, this wasn't really a groundbreaking setting, but in hindsight, I think it's unique. Aside from 2 sections in The Evil Within 2, it's the only time we see a regular city overrun by zombies. Both remakes run on the RE engine, which in my opinion doesn't get enough credit. They both excel at depicting a city recently overrun. Interiors in both games are dense and detailed. RE2 focuses a bit more on the police station and underground sections, while RE3 leans a little bit more into outdoor set pieces. Both strike a solid balance of memorable set pieces versus filler. Although I give RE2 a slight edge in art direction, there are many moments in RE3 that impressed me as well. I'm also grouping RE4 Remake and RE Village together because they share strikingly similar settings and art direction. Both start with a slow, creepy village, escalate into gothic castles or mansions, transition into strange science horror labs or factories, and finally climax in over-the-top action. Both open in a isolated European village, establishing the core theme of rural decay. The architecture in both mixes stone, wood, and plaster, grounded in realism to make the horror feel tangible. Now, they're different in the sense that Resident Evil 4's village is a grim but lived-in Spanish farming town. Contrast that with Resident Evil Village's village. It's set in an already collapsed Eastern European hamlet. The horror is more mythical and otherworldly than human. Then both games move on to the castle or mansion setting. They both communicate dominance and control. Their scale, lavish interiors, and throne-like chambers establish them as symbols of the ruling antagonist's authority in these places. Resident Evil 4, the castle feels more decadent and cult-driven, rich reds, gold accents, banners, and ceremonial spaces. While in RE Village, Castle Dimitrescu leans into Eastern European aristocracy. It's richly detailed with carved wood, marble everywhere, ornate dining halls, over-the-top posh spaces. After the castles, both games take a hard turn into science horror. Now, they have quite a bit of differences. The Island Lab from Resident Evil Remake is a militarized compound blending research facilities with its fortress-like design, while Heisenberg's factory in Resident Evil Village is a surreal industrial nightmare. Endless gears and conveyor belts. It leans more into industrial gothic steampunk than it does realism. Next, we gotta talk about the beauty of Silent Hill 2. Like Alan Wake 2 and Dead Space, nothing ever feels forgettable. From the iconic opening parking lot to the foggy graveyard, or the first time you see Silent Hill, the town proper, or your early forays into rundown abandoned buildings, it's all good. I think the Woodside Apartments courtyard was visually striking, as is the first Dead James encounter in front of the TV. I was absolutely mesmerized by this swinging light during the Pyramid Head fight, the cockroach-infested rooms drenched in red, and I spent some time oogling the surreal yet real feeling moments outside of Lakeview Hotel. I even geeked out over details like the dust and fingerprints on the VCR for more time than I care to admit. I think this game has one of the strongest visual identities in the genre by far. Next, let's talk about Silent Hill F. Unlike past Silent Hill games that relied on rust and industrial decay, F introduces a new motif: beauty as terror. Here, delicate red spider lilies and invasive floral growths aren't comforting. They're the source of body horror and corruption. The setting also stands apart. Instead of small-town America, a European village, or futuristic spaceships or prisons, Silent Hill F takes place in 1960s rural Japan. Set in a mountain village filled with shrines, rice fields, and weathered wooden homes, that grounded realism makes it all the more shocking when nature and infection begin to overtake everything. The art direction leans into folk horror aesthetics, torii gates, ritual objects, and traditional architecture reimagined as sources of dread. Scenes are composed less for jump scares and more for symbolism, melancholy, and psychological impact. And I think you have to at least give the game credit for its unique art direction. I couldn't find a single other game online set in 1960s rural Japan in the genre, and for an Unreal Engine 5 game, it truly has a distinct visual identity when so many other games on the engine have similar looks. Next up is the Callisto Protocol, which is essentially a legally distinct new Dead Space game. However, in terms of art direction, Black Iron Prison does manage to visually differentiate itself from the Ishimura. Black Iron feels a bit more grounded and realistic, slightly less high-tech. Unfortunately, most of the environments, although well detailed and dense, do blur together. However, the standout set pieces are genuinely impactful. The opening prison section overwhelms you with moving lights, dense particle effects, and detailed geometry. Some atmospheres are so graphic they pushed even my tolerance for blood, guts, and gore. Similar to Alan Wake 2, the game occasionally uses water reflections as part of its lighting design, which I found mesmerizing. Later, the visuals shift with a convincing snow and blizzard environment, and there's a short but memorable detour into a cyberpunk alley drenched in neon lighting. Running on Unreal Engine 4, the game delivers some of the most impressive graphics I've ever seen, particularly in its facial animation and lighting. I don't get it. So I started digging around and I found a video on the YouTube channel Threat Interactive that explains the technical magic behind it, though I admit all of it went over my head. What I can say is this: despite it being on an older engine, the visuals are better than, in my opinion, than basically any Unreal Engine 5 game. And last but not least, in my opinion, the creepiest art direction comes from The Evil Within 2. Very early in the game, you enter a hotel where you first encounter antagonists Stefano's victims. I have no doubt in my mind developers drew heavily from one of my favorite sleeper horror films, The Cell. The first major room you enter strongly echoes one of The Cell's most iconic scenes. Stefano's victims are also frozen in time within translucent fields, which feels like a direct remix of the horse scene, also from The Cell. Now, the atmosphere here feels less like a hotel and more like a stage for ritualized violence. Mannequin-like corpses are posed in states of death or agony, while the walls are lined with disturbing yet elegant photography that gets under my skin. Though it never directly references real-world events, the aesthetics here overlap with common imagery from art, film, and photography tied to conspiracies of secret societies, hidden power, and ritual violence. Checkerboard floors in some of the corridors echo the black and white motifs, often linked to occult architecture. I think developers also likely drew from Eyes Wide Shut. Both settings use luxurious interiors, velvet drapes, chandeliers, gilded halls as backdrops for unsettling ritual undertones. It feels disturbingly real, echoing real conspiracies and stories of alleged private islands and strange temple-like spaces that have similar aesthetics where not so good things happened. It resonates because figures like Stefano exist in reality, making this atmosphere to me far creepier than typical zombies, gore, or abandoned buildings. Now, let's wrap this up. If you enjoyed the visuals and cinematography in this video, please go check out my Beauty of playlist, where I showcase the best visuals from each featured game and many more, edited to custom music without my annoying voice over the footage. There was a lot more I wanted to cover here, but we're already 20 minutes in, plus I need to get back to emulator and modding content because that's what the people are really here for. If you liked this detour, let me know. It's been fun to branch out from my usual content and get a little bit more creative. Remember, like, share, or sub to support the channel, and spread the good news of the gaming gospel, and ye shall be blessed. I say these things in the name of me, Amor the Father, Kojima the Son, and Carmack the Holy Ghost. Amen, and enjoy the games.